Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant. Today I'm talking all about WrestleMania 14 as seen on the WWE Network, and a lot more enjoyable than WrestleMania 13. So if you didn't listen to that review, pause this one, go back and watch that one first, and listen to that review before listening to this one. Go back and listen to 1 through 13 before listening to this one. I mean, it's a really good WrestleMania, but you're going to want to listen to those WrestleMania reviews first before checking on this one. But nevertheless, if you've already seen and listened to my reviews of WrestleManias 1 through 13, then you're in good shape. WrestleMania 14 was really, really good in my opinion. I love this WrestleMania. Not the best WrestleMania that I've ever seen, but up to this point, I thought it was one of the better ones. And I don't know if it was this WrestleMania or maybe it was 15, but some people were pooping all over this one or 15 or whatever it was. And I don't know why either, because I thought 14 and even 15 were both very, very good. I thought this one was a great WrestleMania, and I'll get to why in just a minute. But it wasn't phenomenal, but it was a lot better than a lot of the more earlier ones that I talked about before, and a well-rounded card at that. So kicking off the show, a 15-team battle royal to determine the number one contenders to the WWF Tag Team Championships. So much like last year, the number one contenders match for the tag titles kicking off the show, and a really, really fun matchup. I enjoyed this matchup a lot more than I did the four-team elimination tag team match from WrestleMania 13. And the most interesting part about this matchup, and I mean, it was obvious who was going to win after they were announced, but probably the most fun aspect of this contest was the fact that LOD, Legion of Doom 2000, made their return on this show as the mystery team in the matchup with Sonny as their manager. And it was like, the place went crazy, and the commentators went nuts as well on commentary. It was really fun. So I thought that was the best match, the best part about this matchup. The match itself, I mean, your typical battle royal. It would also be noteworthy for the forming of the new tag team, who would later become known as Too Cool, Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexay. I forgot what their original names were, but they were referred to as their original moniker, Scott something, and Brian Christopher, Jerry Lawler's son, who I think they have never actually acknowledged in storyline aside from like 2011 that he was his son. But still, the matchup was what it was. But the best part about this contest easily was LOD returning. The place went crazy and a great way to kick off the show, especially after their win the previous year at WrestleMania, making a grand return to the grandest stage of them all, winning the number one contenders battle royal for the tag team title. So a nice way to kick off the show. Up next for the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship, Taka Michinoku taking on Aguila. I think that's how you pronounce it. I forgot how they pronounced it, but I had never really heard of him before this WrestleMania, so I'm not really familiar with his work, but I am familiar with Taka Michinoku, and he is great. These guys are both really, really good, and they were both, I think, Aguila, and I apologize if I'm botching the pronunciation of that name, but it was a nice matchup. I mean, the light heavyweight division in WWE during the Attitude Era was, of course, a glorified version of the Cruiserweight division over in WCW, and that was the only reason why they incorporated the Cruiserweights, the light heavyweight division in WWE, was because they knew it was such a huge success over in WCW. They wanted to rip them off, so they did the light heavyweight division, which is fine, but it wasn't even that bad, but it was not the same. The WCW Cruiserweights were amazing. Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho, Juventud Guerrera, all these other guys, Eddie Guerrero, so many great talents over there. And I couldn't name you 2 or 3 guys that were in the light heavyweight division around this time in WWE. Maybe it's because I'm not, of course I'm familiar with the Attitude Era, but I'm not really familiar with the undercard and the light heavyweight division. It wasn't even around for that long. It was only around for a couple of years. This was the first WrestleMania where it was defended at. And, of course, the Goldberg ripoff, Gillberg, would hold that championship for about a year, and I think 2000 or 99 or whatever it was. So majority of the time that the division was around, they treated it like a joke anyway, so it really wasn't, it was really kind of pointless. But this matchup, though, was kind of nice. I mean, kind of coming off the hot tag team match and the return of LOD and them winning. This was a nice kind of like a letdown matchup. People were into what they were doing. They didn't really care about each guy specifically. It was just kind of like, it was like the Divas match of the pay-per-view pretty much. I mean, we didn't have a one-on-one women's matchup on the show. We would get the mixed tag team match, which I'll get to in a couple minutes. But this was kind of like the Divas matchup of the show. Had a lot of good action, though, and a really enjoyable contest, even though I didn't really have a preference who won, but I did enjoy the action for what it was worth. Up next for the European Championship, Triple H defending against Owen Hart in a really, really good matchup. It was great to see Triple H kind of mix it up with Owen at WrestleMania. And like I've said time and time again, dating back to WrestleMania 10 when he made his WrestleMania debut, other than the Blue Blazer the year prior. But Owen Hart, whatever he did, he was great. Some matches more than others, but it was great to see him back in singles action at WrestleMania. Of course, he was in tag team action at WrestleMania 13. I think the year prior he might have been in tag team action too. And this WrestleMania going one-on-one with Triple H in a really good contest for the European title. Triple H and China would ultimately emerge victorious, with China aiding in victory. So a nice matchup. I enjoyed it for what it was. And the whole story around it, I think it was at this WrestleMania. Might have been the year later. I think actually it was the year later, so I won't get into it here. The whole corporation thing and D-Generation X splitting up. It was the night after this WrestleMania. The D-Generation X would form with the New Age Outlaws. So that was WrestleMania 15 that I'm thinking about, but I'll get to that when I review that show. But still, though, a really good matchup between Triple H and Owen Hart. Triple H ultimately coming out victorious with his title intact. Up next, a mixed tag team match, only the second or third, I think the third mixed tag team match in WrestleMania history, with the one that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, WrestleMania 6, I want to say, between Macho Man and Sensational Sherry versus Dusty and Sapphire versus, and then there was another mixed tag team match that was at WrestleMania like 10 or 11 that I talked about a couple days ago here on the WrestleRant WrestleMania video series. That's a mouthful. But only the third mixed tag team match in WrestleMania history. I enjoyed it for what it was worth. It wasn't a great wrestling match, and I'll get to why in just a second. But the story was there. I mean, it was kind of confusing. Mark was kind of an asshole to Sable, but yet we were expected to cheer for him. I mean, Sable was the star of the matchup, and she was really impressive here, especially with all the power bombs and stuff. But, and Goldust and Luna were making life hell for both Mero and Sable. And so I guess Mero was kind of like the de facto babyface here, and aligning with Sable. And they would break up a short time later. But like I said in my WrestleMania 12 review, I think it was interesting to see Mero and Sable teaming up at WrestleMania only about almost exactly 2 years after they had first formed at WrestleMania. Remember that whole backstage segment with Mero, the wild card, and Sable was in the corner of Triple H, and they did that whole angle. So that was funny kind of to see that go full circle 2 years later at WrestleMania. But still, though, a fun tag team match. Was not a great wrestling match. But for the story they were telling with Sable and Mero, and Sable, like I said before, was the total star of this contest. She was so organically over with the audience. There was really no reason to not cheer for her here. And Luna and Goldust were a really good team. I don't really remember them being in a long-term relationship on TV and having a kind of a long-term program in place. But for this one WrestleMania, their characters kind of gelled, and kind of the weirdness, the outcast, whatever. And Goldust, Jesus Christ, at this WrestleMania, he was so fucking out of shape. I think it was this WrestleMania. I just remember Mark Mero trying to get up Goldust for his finisher, which was a TKO, and he could barely get the guy up, and Goldust was so overweight. And maybe it's just because I'm thinking of Goldust, aka 2015, and the guy's in the best shape of his life. But in 2000 or 1998, the guy was in terrible shape, and Mark Mero could barely get him up. So that was kind of weird to see. And I think he was at the following year's WrestleMania 99, I think he was at WrestleMania 99 or WrestleMania 15 as well. So, and he was in a lot better shape then a year later. But at this WrestleMania, he looked terrible, and it was really embarrassing to see. But still, I really enjoyed the matchup. Up next for the Intercontinental Championship, The Rock defending against Ken Shamrock. So here's the match stipulation here. If Rock was to be disqualified, which I didn't even realize until I just read this on Wiki. Maybe they talked about this in the matchup. I just don't remember it. That if Rock got himself disqualified, he would have lost the championship to Ken Shamrock. The match itself, the match barely got 5 minutes, and it was fine for what it was, but I was really expecting something more from this, and it really got bogged down from all the interference from Nation of Domination, and The Rock was doing great in that heel role at that time. I think it was at this WrestleMania where they did it was this WrestleMania where they did the backstage segment. I don't know who he was being interviewed by, but he was in an interview, and basically the interview was about if he had been elected to be president of the United States, and Rock was being a complete asshole through the entire thing, and it was so funny. But that was gold. But the match itself left a lot to be desired. I was really expecting a nice match from these two. Only went 5 minutes. And then the finish was really, really weak. Rock eventually tapped out, and technically he lost the title, but in attacking, and why he did this, I have no idea. And I'll explain maybe why in a second. But Ken Shamrock went apeshit in all of Nation of Domination. He went apeshit on The Rock, kept on locking in the ankle lock. He went apeshit on all the referees. And because of that, the decision was reversed, and Rock ultimately won retained the Intercontinental Championship by disqualification. So that was interesting, and I guess it kind of tried to explain it away on commentary and saying, Ken Shamrock is in the zone. When he's in the zone, nothing can stop him. So I guess that was kind of their excuse. But he was made out to look like a complete goof for going crazy even after he won. This guy's supposed to be a babyface. So that was the worst part about it. The whole execution about it was, very, very confusing. The match itself was a disappointment because it wasn't really as good as it could have been. I think that's probably what the reason why I didn't like this matchup. It's not like it was a bad match, but it did not nearly meet my expectations for as good as it probably could have been, had the capability of being, and that's probably why I didn't enjoy it. But it was fine. It was not the worst thing in the world, but just the execution of the finish, I think, confused me more than anything else, with Rock tapping out and attacking the referees. The guy's supposed to be a baby face, so that didn't really make much sense. But it was what it was. Rock ultimately retained the Intercontinental Championship by disqualification. And that's something that you do, by the way, on like a Raw or whatever, not at WrestleMania. They probably wanted to further the feud, but at WrestleMania it should be the be-all, end-all, end the feud, give the belt to Ken Shamrock. So that was a little weird. But anyway, moving on here. A dumpster match for the Tag Team Championships. Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie taking on the New Age Outlaws, who were the defending champions coming into this matchup, Billy Gunn and Road Dogg. A really fun matchup. I'm not a huge fan of like the hardcore wrestling shit that Cactus Jack, a.k.a. Terry Funk, was known for. Like all the ECW stuff, I watched their Barely Legal pay-per-view on the network a couple of months ago, and I reviewed it on nexteraWrestling.weebly.com. Cheap plug if you want to go back and check it out. And the hardcore elements of ECW were obvious. I'm not going to complain about that. But I'm just not a huge fan in general of hardcore wrestling. But this wasn't really hardcore wrestling. It was just a nice little brawl and going backstage and trying to put each other's in the dumpsters and stuff like that. It looked pretty scary at some points, especially when they recapped Jack and Chainsaw going into one of the dumpsters on an episode of Raw, and they turned it over and they pushed it off the stage. Like, that was a little scary, but nothing like that here whatsoever. Just a nice little 10-minute brawl with Cactus and Chainsaw, ultimately defeating the New Age Outlaws by putting them in the dumpster, and then I think it was Chainsaw who took the crane or whatever it was and put it on top of the dumpster. So a pretty creative way of emerging victorious to win the tag team titles. It would be short-lived. They would lose those championships back to the New Age Outlaws the following night on Monday Night Raw when D-Generation X would form. But still, it was a nice little win at WrestleMania for Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie in this very innovative dumpster match. One of those innovative matches that I didn't really have a problem with. I didn't feel like a Vince Russo idea, something stupid like a whatever on a pole match. In theory it seems stupid, but the execution was very nice, so that's where I kind of liked it. Up next, The Undertaker taking on Kane, of course, in one of the greatest, in my opinion, stories that WWE has ever done. Their matches have never been 5 stars or anything, but from start to finish, you consider their stuff in 97 all the way up to 2010, even just in the last couple of years when they teamed in that episode of Raw, I think it was in 2013. The greatest story, continuous story that WWE has ever told with 2 of their characters in The Undertaker and Kane. The match itself wasn't awesome. Kane had just debuted. They were trying to protect him by having him take 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 tombstones for Undertaker to put him out for the victory. But still, I thought the match was solid for what it was. Considering all of Undertaker's previous matches at WrestleMania were not barn burners either. I enjoyed this matchup probably more so for the story than anything else. So I really enjoyed that matchup from that respect. The in-ring action was not great. It was probably as solid as his matches were with Diesel and with Psycho Sid from the 2 years prior. But, the story kind of made up for it. That's why I kind of like this matchup more than anything else. And Paul Bearer being in Kane's corner and whatever else. So I thought the story was really, really good, and that kind of made up for the lack of excitement in the match itself, and Undertaker ultimately overcoming his evil brother Kane. And I thought I would point this out too, because before the matchup, of course, the infamous moment with Kane tombstoning Pete Rose for the first of 3 WrestleManias. And, watching it back, it just didn't make any sense. It was a great moment and all, and I loved it. But, watching it back, and maybe someone can explain this to me, that Kane was a heel at the time, obviously. Pete Rose was getting booed. He came out, he was ring announcer for this matchup. He comes out, announces Kane down to the ring, and then after he does that, he starts shitting all over the live crowd. Where was this WrestleMania? I'm going to look this up. I think it was in Philadelphia. It was in Boston. I'm sorry. It was in Boston. Of course, that'd be fitting. With all the things that he had to go, he was going through in baseball and whatever. And so he was a total heel here. He was a complete heel here, just shitting all over the crowd. So because of that, the crowd's booing him, and when Kane ultimately tombstoned him, that kind of turned Kane babyface for a moment. And then we were expected to boo Kane going into this matchup with the babyface Undertaker. So it would have made more sense if it was the Undertaker attacking Paul Bearer. It was an inhuman act with Kane attacking Pete Rose. But that wouldn't be something that we wouldn't see the Undertaker do. That's something that he's done in the past, attack baby faces and celebrities and whatever. So I don't know why they didn't do it with the Undertaker instead of Kane, but still I loved it. It was an awesome moment. It just didn't make any sense from a storyline standpoint because they were trying to push Kane as a heel, but he just did this babyface act. So that was a little weird, but it was a nice, great, one of those historic, monumental moments in WrestleMania history that you can't really hate on because, it was so memorable and historic. But we get to the main event, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Shawn Michaels for the WWE title with Mike Tyson as the special guest referee. The build-up speaks for itself. There's really nothing more to say other than it was epic. Everything they were doing with Mike Tyson teasing, going with Stone Cold, ultimately to side with Shawn Michaels and D-Generation X. And the build-up to the WrestleMania was great. Everything they did going into this WrestleMania was stellar. But the match itself, Stone Cold has talked about this, Shawn Michaels has talked about this, and I'm not going to shit on the match because I talked about this with John on over the phone a couple days ago. In that, Shawn Michaels, his body was so beat up at this point. Of course, the casket match of the Royal Rumble was what really did him in, and that was kind of the point where he said, fuck it, I'm retiring, because he wasn't doing too well, and that was the point. And even still, he finished off his contract or whatever, he finished off his WrestleMania run, and that's why the matchup wasn't as good as it possibly could have been. The match was not a wrestling classic. It was a lot of brawling, and I'm very surprised, looking at the results here on Wiki, that it was about 20 minutes long, almost exactly, off by a second. But I'm very surprised it was a 20-minute long match because I thought, watching it in the moment, it felt like it was a lot shorter. There was a lot of brawling. When they eventually did go in the ring, they didn't do too much. The finish consisted of Austin going for the Stone Cold Stunner, Shawn Michaels trying to reverse into a Sweet Chin Music, Austin, catching the foot, spinning him around, hitting with a stunner, 1, 2, 3, and it's over. It's not like your constant finishers that you would usually see at WrestleMania and a lot of emotion, nothing like that. I mean, the post-match stuff would overshadow the match itself ultimately, with Mike Tyson siding with Stone Cold and knocking out Shawn Michaels and turning on D-Generation X. The match was more known for that than it was the match itself. I'm not going to sit here and say the match sucked. I thought it was a really good match, but it definitely not. Kind of going back to the Rock and Ken Shamrock matchup. The reason I was disappointed with it was because it wasn't as great as it possibly could have been, and I don't blame that on Austin. I don't blame that on Shawn Michaels because Shawn Michaels was, at this point in his career, was in no condition to compete. He should have retired. I know they wanted to give him his last match, but they didn't even tout it that way. They just kind of, that was really never acknowledged until the next night on Raw, when D-Generation X kind of said that Shawn Michaels took his ball and went home and said that he was done wrestling. So this really wasn't the grand final match of Shawn Michaels at that time, or at least I don't think it was. So it wasn't really treated that way, and it was, of course, known for Stone Cold picking up his first WrestleMania title win, his first ever WWE Championship victory. So it's forever going to be known for that. But still, the match itself was not great. It was good, but by far not nearly as good as probably could have been. And like I said, I don't blame Michaels. I don't blame Austin. I just blame them for kind of doing the match to begin with. They probably should have kind of switched it out, maybe done Taker and Kane pretty much already had their match set in stone. I don't know who else they would have put in there aside from Shawn Michaels. I don't think Triple H was ready either. He was at the European title level. But still, it is disappointing that we never really got that real matchup between Stone Cold and Michaels. If we had Michaels at 100% and then we got that matchup, it would have been 10 times better. But considering the condition that Shawn Michaels was in at that period in time, at the time of this matchup, he made the most of it, had a good showing. Stone Cold picking up his first championship ever, winning his first WWE title on this show, and then Shawn Michaels retiring, and then the post-match stuff with Mike Tyson knocking him out. So it was a great moment to go off the show with. On the whole, I enjoyed this WrestleMania on the whole more than I did WrestleMania 13. I thought it was a really good WrestleMania, a lot of good moments. The light heavyweight stuff, the tag team stuff, the mixed tag team match, a lot of fun matches, nothing tremendous, but it was a lot of fun stuff. And I really enjoyed, of course, like I said before, this story between Undertaker and Kane. Easily the best story that WWE's ever told in their illustrious history. The main event was pretty good. It was not as great as it probably could have been. Like I said before, I don't want to beat a dead horse. But the moment of Stone Cold winning his first championship, his first WWE title, and the moment of Mike Tyson knocking out Shawn Michaels afterwards are well worth going back to watch. So for that reason alone, go back and watch WrestleMania 14 on the WWE Network. I thought it was a really good show, and you might enjoy it as well. So with that being said, folks, I'll be back on Tuesday with my review of WrestleMania 15. Crazy to think that we're almost halfway through these WrestleMania reviews. I've been loving watching these WrestleManias back on the WWE Network, and I look forward to continuing to review them for the next month right here on WrestleRant. But in the meantime, in between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant. Make sure to find me on Facebook at Graham Jason Matthews. Make sure to show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. All support is greatly appreciated. Thanks for listening, folks, and I'll catch you guys on Tuesday.